I'm that global tech attorney, and we build tools and infrastructure that enables innovative, high-growth companies to scale with confidence. The focus here today, and our focus, is on translating cutting-edge technology into operational realities. How we do this is, today we're going to talk about how to build a globally compliant crypto product, and we're going to walk through the different stages, obstacles that are involved in this process. So I've had so many clients come up to me who are founders, who are people looking to create, and they want to operate across markets. They're not entirely sure about what regulatory frameworks they have to abide by, how to build their product according to what those needs are, keeping consumers, market realities, and regulation in mind, as well as adhere to all the benchmarks for licensing, for regulation, and build something that is sustainable. So let's get into that. Before we do, though, let's talk about a few key terms and concepts. So my focus here is across the board, across my decade of legal experience across markets, because I see the US market, I'm qualified to practice law, I have a qualifying law degree in the UK, EU laws, as well as have practiced and have experience with Asia and the Middle East region. So what I see is that founders are not entirely sure how to go about these challenges. So let's talk about the key terms. So on-chain economy. On-chain economy is all economic activity, production, transfer of value that is on-chain, and everything that is basically written on blockchain technology, distributed ledger technology, that is on-chain. Off-chain would be things like pricing that is updating based on which contracts will be made. And it consists of sports scores, stock prices, and that triggers contracts, as I said. So let's talk about on-ramp and off-ramp. What is that? My purpose here is I see the amount of lack of legal know-how and the inability to understand what lawyers do. And there is this huge need in the market to understand the realities of what you're up against when you're going out there to create and to scale effectively. Like, you're building a product worth millions of dollars, you're getting funding for it. How effective is that with the market risks involved, with the operational uncertainties? What is going to happen there? So let's dive into it. I'm going to talk very briefly about key terms before we get into the meat and bones of our analysis today. What is on-ramp? What is off-ramp? So consider a ramp, consider a highway on which that is the decentralized finance highway, right? On-ramp would be getting on it. So that would be converting traditional currencies, fiat, to crypto, and off-ramp would be getting off it. That would be converting crypto to fiat or traditional currencies. And what the promise of the crypto ecosystem is that it offers real-time 24/7 conversions, it offers fast, convenient payments, and it offers complete accuracy in the transactions. But what founders, creators, developers are up against in reality is a lot of regulations, a maze in which to go through, and to not be entirely sure what's going to happen at different stages, which creates a lot of uncertainty given that technology is evolving really fast. But laws are going up to speed to create that. Okay, so let's talk about the components of an on-chain economy. So there is assets, there's digital value existing primarily online, which is solely on-chain because it's recorded in these blockchain transactions consisting of cryptocurrencies, stablecoins, and tokens, right? So we have those. And then we have the licensing, which is the first important component, which is the virtual assets and the licensing. That's number one. Number two is infrastructure, the railroads upon which this money, this creation of value is going to move. So we have blockchains and layers. For instance, Ethereum, Solana, which may be used as the base settlement layers, which means the base settlement layers are what is going to be the way in which these currencies are translated. For instance, fiat to crypto, it's like the most commonly or the most used exchanges of value on these platforms or apps that we're talking about. Bridges connect different chains, allowing assets and data to move between economies. And oracles are off-chain data, as we talked about, like there is so much sports scores, stock prices that are on-chain that trigger contracts. So for instance, the promise of crypto is that stock prices would not, the stock market would not open and close at a certain time anymore because everything is online. So you can basically you can go on there and see, and 24/7, 365 days a year, it's going to go and be working. It's instantaneous, it's fast, it's convenient. How do we make it happen though? So applications and institutions, businesses, decentralized finance. We're going to talk about, just to introduce you to these terms, lend, borrow, swap interest in smart contracts. That is decentralized finance. And NFT marketplaces and ecosystems, digital art, music, gaming, assets that are real world, and identity. So decentralized autonomous organizations are on-chain member-owned communities for governance, investment, or collaboration. On-chain businesses, companies where core product, service, and payments reside in smart contracts. So the participants, the stakeholders in the ecosystem are the users, the developers. The users are the individuals with wallets. The developers create these apps. The validators or stakers secure networks. And the liquidity providers, they supply assets to decentralized finance protocols. Okay, so the key legal issues here are stable coins or payments. These are the most regulated because it determines the on-chain, the on-ramp and off-ramp activity, which means how fiat enters or exits, right? And how off-chain legal identity relates to on-chain determines our licensing and regulation activity and protocols. Then we have product strategy, which is new on-chain business models. Number 4, privacy and policy, the transparency balance of public blockchains with data protection laws, example, GDPR. So let's get into the crux of resolving these issues and how do we go about it. Okay, so we're going to talk about 3 focus areas, which are building the framework. Remember, framework first, product second. So we build an infrastructure, we build the ecosystem our product needs to thrive given market conditions. And then secondly, we have licensing and regulations. How do we sort those out? Then thirdly, we go to product design. And I'm going to walk you through all of these stages. It's going to be a super helpful. It's going to be probably the most helpful 15-20 minutes of your life if you are a founder in this space looking to build and looking to navigate this Having said that, this is educational purposes only, so do consult an attorney, do consult someone who is a professional before making legal or financial decisions. Okay, so we have the framework to operate, licenses for launch, product design with product integration and compliance by design. So let's go to a regular scenario I see, and I'm going to call this client project AlphaPay for purposes of this particular session. Okay, so we have fintech wanting to launch USD-backed stablecoin for cross-border payments, accessible in a non-custodial wallet. And what they want to do is they want to start immediately. They want to start off operating in the US, the APAC, and the EU region, right? So another thing is that I was just looking at the regulations that are coming up, and in the UK, a few changes are afoot, but we're going to get into that later on. I do want to get into the nitty-gritties of what we're going up against at this point. So let's go to the intro and the challenge. The promise is instant low-cost global payments with accuracy and anonymity. The reality is a regulatory maze which can stall even the best projects. So what do? First, we go around to doing a risk assessment, which consists of product mapping, and that means the entire flow of the operations of the on-ramp, off-ramp activity are mapped out to find regulatory and legal triggers. For instance, money transmitter licenses, security laws, all these are going to really, really matter when it comes to creating something of value and substance. So for the framework, we're going to talk about 3 pillars. So 3 pillars are AML and CFT, the product you create, the infrastructures must be designed in a way that they're anti-money laundering and they cannot be counterfeited. So CFT laws come into the picture with FATF and global banking regulations. That is the first thing you need to keep in mind. And I don't want to get into too much detail because the purpose here is that I introduce the concepts and there is an infinite amount of detail. My purpose is to translate these nuanced realities to actionable steps to know what to look at and where to go. But of course, the entire process cannot be completely explained without really getting into your particular problem and scenario that you're looking to create in. So the second thing is consumer protection, right? There is TLAW, there is UDOP. Consumer protection really comes into the picture because you're moving money, you're moving virtual assets in this particular scenario, and that is super important to have these regulations in place because your main thing in getting a money transmitter license is to convince the regulatory body that you are doing AML, CFT protections, you have KYC in place, you know your customer, you know their identity, you know where their money is coming from, and then you're protecting your consumer, you're letting them know this is a very volatile market, it is evolving very quickly, it is in its infancy, and you need to know that this is something that the consumer needs to be aware of, right? You need to hold their money with responsibility as a company. Even if you're exchanging it, if you're holding their user access keys, this is the law that is changing in UK right now from 2027. If you have even one of the 4 user access keys, you cannot say that where we don't own it, we are not, that basically would fall into securities, You cannot outsource functions to say that there's a multi-signature process, that the outsider, the third party, is the one that is in custody or in ownership or controlling the assets. So that opens a whole new area that is upcoming for London. Okay, so tech governance, reserve management, right? This is super important to ensure that at every stage of the product design and licensing process, all of this is going to be kept in mind. Moving on to licensing. This particular company, Project AlphaPay, is looking to build infrastructures and launch their product that enables their consumers which are businesses as well as individuals, to transfer value for remittances, for cross-border payments. But then they go into the US and there's 50 different states. Every state has different regulations. For example, look at Texas. We look at Texas, we look at the fact that there are certain exemptions in place that are business friendly, which means that if just crypto is being exchanged, crypto to crypto, or you're going off-ramp, crypto to fiat, then you don't need a money transmitter license in most cases. But if you are going on-ramp, you're converting money to crypto assets, then you need a money transmitter license, because the whole activity, that entire part of that activity, counts as money transmission. You got it. Okay, so moving on. What can you do if you want to go into the US market, for instance? And there's 50 different states and 50 different money transmission licenses with different regulatory requirements. And you have to satisfy each regulatory body. What you can do is you pick the top 2 or 3 markets that you want to go into, whether it's Texas, New York, Florida, California. Those are some of the major markets. And you have an anchor license. You satisfy their KYC, their AML requirements. You figure it out. You tell them what they need to know, because they are regulators, but they're also partners and regulators. Let me tell you, from my experience working with the chief financial bodies of the world, working for these policies, for regulatory oversights. I have a degree, a background in finance and public policy with these institutions, with my degree from Rice University. And then what these regulators are looking for is that they are very conservative, and they are up against a lot of rapid advancements. So they want to be convinced. They don't want to slow innovation down. I also want your innovation to go through. But there are certain reservations. There's certain obstacles that you as a founder, you as a company, need to meet to a satisfactory standard, right? Okay. So having that first or 2, 3 target markets, getting that anchor license, that's your first step. Once you've done that, that is going to show other regulators that this is a company that has been operating. You operate in those few target markets for 6 months to a year. You show the regulators in other states that we're already operating, abiding by all these laws already, right? So that builds trust, that builds transparency, that builds confidence in what you're seeing and what you're doing, and that certainly helps your case. So that would be the jurisdiction and regulatory triggers based on your product flow. So remember, you started with the risk assessment, which means how does my product flow, like the transactions, how do they flow within the system, the ecosystem, the wider ecosystem, and within the way the transaction is moving in itself within the app or the tool that I am using. Where are there third parties? What are the regulatory triggers? As well as what jurisdictions am I operating in? Where are the risks there? What is happening in those markets? Which markets do I go into and get into? And then you design controls. Controls are measures adopted to reduce risk. So there are operational controls that you could have to, for instance, protect data. There are different controls you can use, but first you must know the problem. You must know the loopholes for your product to fall into these gray areas where it can be more heavily regulated, and how to protect or design accordingly that there is no question that you're going to go through and your product meets those requirements by and large. And also, you're one of the front runners to make it happen in the virtual asset space, in the blockchain technology space, because this is something that is coming up so fast, and very few people are able to really understand the nitty-gritties of what exactly is coming up for the future. So the third part is product design. And here I want to bring on the Howey test. Let's bring that in. And let's speak about the different things that are happening with reference to a particular feature to be included in this globally compliant crypto product. So what could happen here is, what if we want to put in a feature that there is a yield that can be earned on these stable coins, right? How do we go about this? So for this, we brought in that the crypto assets regulation by October 2027 will basically apply to building wallets and decentralized finance, where the wallets are, if any, at any stage held by that particular company, by just that, they come within the ambit of the most heavily regulated industry, which is finance, right? And the first thing here is applying the Howey test. There are 4 factors that make it a security in the US. So this particular regulation I just told you about is in the UK. It's the crypto assets regulation, which is going to make it harder to prove that a non-custodial wallet is basically categorizing the company as not holding those assets, not transmitting money, so the difference here is securities versus it being non-securities. And let's go to the US market, right? Because when that is declared a security in the UK jurisdiction, then it being a security means extensive laws apply to it. So a third-party provider cannot be used to simply state that we have non-custodial wallets and this does not qualify as a security. So for the Howey test, there is an investment of money, common enterprise, profits from others as efforts, and an expectation of profit. So what is essential here is the classification of these virtual assets. Is it a security? Is it a commodity? What exactly is it, right? So for instance, the feature that we're going to look into is building an internal yield mechanism. Would this make it an unregistered security? As far as the questions above are concerned, then there is an investment of money, yes. There is a common enterprise, which could be a pooled asset portfolio User activities generating. So the third thing is whether the user activities are generating profit. If they are, then that means it's not a security. But if it is, then mostly yes. If there's an expectation of profits, then of course that is going to be there. And then there's profits from others' efforts, right? So there's actively managing reserves, then yes. Okay. So there's this three lenses test: securities, commodities, or money transmitter license. Which of these does this classification of the digital asset come into, and what are the requirements for your company or your app, your product, your tool operating within that framework? So the way to go about this, in this particular scenario, what we did was, this was an actual case that came up to me for consultation at RICCOR, and we advise them to decouple profit expectations from the efforts that they're doing. So for regulatory clarity, to partner up with a third party, which was a licensed bank for the yield component, right? And the regulatory clarity was lending for interest, which was a well-defined licensed bank interest product. So the expectation of profits, the way money was being made in that particular scenario, was not through the crypto yield product, but through the bank interest product, which is a traditional financing tool. And it's already super well regulated. That means it already meets the threshold and criteria for that particular activity to be considered an investment activity by a third party. Number two was to shift effort of others. The profit from efforts were from the regulated bank, not the managerial efforts of the crypto company. And due to this tech routing layer, there was no investment manager required to be hired for this particular purpose. Okay, so we come to risk mitigation, number three. Also, what we advised in our consultation process, through RICCOR, through R&M law, which are companies that operate with our global headquarters in Austin, with our offices in Dubai, in Austin, operating in the Middle East as well, in London. So we have risk mitigation, state money transmitter licensing concerns addressed as funds in yield program, explicitly not in our transactional flow, but in the bank trust account, right? So the trade-off is it's not pure decentralized finance, but it is slower, it is less flexible, it is revenue sharing. And it is compliant, defensible, scalable. So the key takeaway is that there is structural separation, which is building a wall between well-regulated payment institution stablecoin and any yield-generating activity, unless you're prepared to be a registered security issuer and investment advisor. So to sum up what we discussed today, we're going to go through a few critical rules that we put into our playbook. From framework to licensing to product design, that's what we've covered today, to be a globally compliant crypto company. And 18 months later, this particular company was live in 5 states, 3 countries, with 0 regulatory actions. So what we learned along the process, and this is a 5-step playbook, is to deconstruct the product into regulatory actions. Number 2, to map, not assume, jurisdiction and regulatory triggers. So you know by your research from the first step to the last what you're up against, and to keep updated with that process of regulatory changes. Number 3 is to prioritize licensing in markets with while paying attention to the risks involved in the process. And then part 4 is controls, measuring, reducing controls, example, privacy and compliance by design. So measures reducing risks by privacy, compliance by design. Number 5 is regulatory dialogue opened. And that is how we make it happen, by creating a structured program and making sure the yield in our particular example where the feature was to have a yield generating stable coin. Make sure the yield is generated by banks traditionally lending without managing the digital asset itself in the long term. So that is the ground we covered today, and I hope you found this helpful, because our purpose is to create content that really speaks to the real world challenges that are coming up every single day, and to build to scale sustainably across markets. And that's exactly what we spoke about today. And I'll be back and we'll speak some more.